Broadcasting from the Community Service Radio Studio at the Pop Music Academy in Sellersburg, Indiana, welcome to Dangerous Subversive Radio. Prepare to open your mind and question everything. Good evening and welcome to an extremely wet episode of Dangerous Subversive Radio. We have had a series of thunderstorms outside this evening, so torrential that I was forced to carry this shirt and tie into the studio in a plastic grocery bag, or else I would look like a drowned rat right now. I thought we'd mix things up a little bit and have a little bit of the end of the show at the beginning.
Ooh, that sounds neat.
Yeah, so if you're interested in sharing this show with anyone, you can subscribe to Jackie Smith's YouTube channel. There you can find every single episode of Dangerous Subversive Radio, as well as every single episode of Community Service Radio. If you'd like to... Can people make comments on your blog, Jackie? I mean, can they?
Well, yes, they can.
Yeah.
They are subject to review. And so if there are some trashy comments, bye.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so that blog is COMMSR.com. That is the Community Service Radio blog. You can reach me on Facebook or at my email address, tm.rettallack@gmail.com. And that reminds me, I am your host, Tim Retallick, and that man behind the curtain is master engineer and producer Jackie Smith.
Hello.
I would like to give people an update on our antenna. Last I heard, it was being tuned to 1700 on the AM dial.
That is correct.
And very soon to be...
It should be here on the 7th.
On the 7th. And then we will be an actual broadcast station. Now, before you run over to your radios and try to tune us in on 1700 AM, I have to remind you that the power of this transmitter is...
It's not very powerful.
Not very powerful.
So we're looking at probably a 7-mile max radius from the studio.
But if you happen to be driving down Interstate 65
You'll
through
hear us.
Sellersburg, Indiana, you will hear us. Because we will be broadcasting...
From 406 Pop Avenue.
Yes, but for how much of the day...
Well, I'm planning on going 24/7 once we get started.
We will have, what we're going to do is we're just going to start, get everybody caught up by just rebroadcasting every single episode of Community Service Radio, followed by every single episode of Dangerous Subversive Radio.
That sounds great, doesn't it?
But then it will be Dangerous Subversive Radio.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
DSR.
Yeah. This is Tim's World. Never heard of it? I'm not surprised. You see, it actually shares Earth's orbit, but on the exact opposite side of the sun. So none of us ever see it. How do I know about it? Well, because it's Tim's World and I'm Tim. You might think, it looks exactly like Earth, doesn't it? And in almost every conceivable way, it is an exact duplicate of Earth. Most of the differences are in the realm of ideas, the way people behave and treat each other, so you can't actually see those. As a matter of fact, the only visible difference between Tim's World and Earth is this. On Tim's World, they eat their corn on the cob like this. Now, you might think that this being Tim's World and Tim being singular, that this world would have a one-world government. Well, think again. Absolutely not. And for one reason. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. A one-world government would have absolute power and absolutely no one to answer to. And if you think anyone is going to own any means to defend themselves, think again. How do you think that's going to work out? This is the federal Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado. it's a real peaceful place, too. A one world government would produce world peace. And it would have world peace because every single inhabitant on the planet would be so far and so firmly under the thumb of the most terrible dictator you could imagine that all hope would be not only lost, but forgotten. Now, on Tim's world, there used to be an organization made up of nations, which you could say were united in a certain way. And they would get together and discuss things, and sometimes they would come to conclusions that the inhabitants of Tim's world would agree with, and sometimes not. And when they came up with something the inhabitants of Tim's world didn't like, you know what they had the power to do about it? Not a damn thing. That means no sanctions, no peacekeeping troops, no international taxes to pay for it all. And I say all this in the past tense because when all the nations realized they weren't going to get any freebies out of this organization, no one wanted to pay for it, and it just kind of went bankrupt and out of existence. No, on Tim's world, political power is actually as decentralized as it's possible to make it. And that means that the federal government doesn't stick their big, fat nose into anything that could possibly be accomplished at the state level. And the state governments don't stick their big, fat noses into anything that could possibly be accomplished at the county level. And the county governments don't stick their big, fat noses into anything that could possibly be accomplished at the municipal level. As a matter of fact, the main the main governing unit on Tim's world is the municipality. Our forefathers would have called them townships. And there's one simple reason for this, and that is that it keeps things simple. Just imagine you've got two groups of people. One consists of a couple hundred people spread out over maybe 50 square miles. The other is a group of upwards of 3 million people spread out over almost 4 million square miles. Now, think about this and ask yourself these questions about these two groups. Which one is going to be easier to organize and manage and run like a Swiss watch? A couple hundred people spread out over 50 miles, or 3 million people spread out over 4 million square miles? Which of them is going to be more manageable in terms of logistics, getting supplies and equipment to all these people? Couple hundred people, 50 square miles, or 3 million people, 4 million square miles? All you environmentalists, which one's going to use less energy? Use up less fossil fuels? Okay. And last but not least, which one is among which group is it going to be easier to deter and ferret out and punish corruption? Couple hundred people over 50 square miles, or 3 million people over 4 million square miles? So when politicians in these municipalities start making expensive, intrusive, restrictive, inefficient laws, one of two things happens. First thing is the villagers start showing up at their doorstep with their pitchforks and torches. But very soon after that, they start to pack their stuff up. And they move out of these municipalities and into other municipalities that don't have such ridiculous laws. And when they do, they take their tax money with them. And so pretty soon, those same politicians start repealing these ridiculous laws. And in short order after that, they just stop writing them in the first place. And instead, they start making laws that make sense. Just laws, fair laws, minimalist laws, and necessary laws, as in they don't write them unless they're needed. And if it ain't broke, they don't try to fix it. So you might think that municipal laws just don't have the clout to get things done. There's no way that people are going to pay the same respect to a town constable as they do to an FBI agent. Well, just think about it, though. A state law that says armed robbery gets you 10 years in jail. Or a municipal law that says armed robbery gets you 10 years in jail. And if you don't think they can make municipal jails as nasty as federal prisons, I kind of doubt that. So it's the same law, it's the same deterrent, the same result. Same penalty, same deterrent. But you know what? Violent crime just is not that much of a problem on Tim's World. And that is because every single responsible adult on Tim's World owns a gun. Oh my God, they must be slaughtering each other right and left. There must be bodies stacked like cordwoods and rivers of blood running in the streets. Not so much. As a matter of fact, violent crime on Tim's World is practically non-existent because the despicable cowards who might commit these violent crimes on other people know that every single victim they might choose has just as big a gun as they do, and they will not hesitate to shoot back. So that just scares the bejesus out of the cowards, the criminals, so much that they don't even try. I mean, sure, they're perfectly willing to hurt someone who can't fight back. But are they going to stick their necks out and risk getting hurt themselves? No, they're not. Why? Because they're a bunch of stinking cowards. That's why. So, while the gun industry on Tim's World is very healthy, the ammunition industry is actually very, very small because so little of their product is ever used. Now, this is not to say that the federal government doesn't have any responsibilities on Tim's World. They do. Things like national defense and coining money and foreign relations and 15 other things which are explicitly spelled out for them. So when the federal government starts saying things like, well, we need to address this problem on a federal level, so that we know that everybody is taken care of, every other level of government says, back off, bozo, not your job. We got this. You just go back to your national defense and your coining money and your foreign relations. We've got this. We're doing just fine. And if the federal government doesn't like that arrangement, you know what they have the power to do about it? Not a damn thing. So, but that's not to say that, the truth is foreign relations on Tim's World are not that difficult because every single country on Tim's World is prosperous and free, and for one reason. On Tim's World, they actually emulate success instead of immediately setting out to destroy it. Every country looks around. They look around at who's been the most successful in terms of freedom and prosperity and peace and power and influence. And they say to themselves, you know what? We're going to do exactly what they did. And I'll bet you it'll work for us. And that's what they do. And that's what happens. Because what works for one person or country will work for any other person or country. And if you don't believe me, just ask this guy. So, foreign affairs don't take up a whole lot of the federal government's time, and really, neither does anything else. In fact, the federal government and their goings-on, you know what? Politics, in general, does not even cross the mind of the average inhabitant of Tim's World on any given day, which gives them a whole lot more time to pursue their goals and their dreams. The small role of the federal government is kind of reflected in their remuneration, and it really kind of sucks. You see, their salary is equal to the mean annual income of the inhabitants. So if the people's income goes down, the federal government's income goes down. The only way they can get a raise is to lift everybody else up too. And they get to earn this salary for exactly 2 terms, and then their butts get kicked out of there. Pension, yeah, they get a pension, a 25% pension for 4 years, and then they have to go get a job just like everyone else. There is an upside for the politicians, though. When they're up for re-election, the government gives them money. Exactly the same amount to every candidate. And they have exactly the same amount of time to use that money. And it's not very long. So, you see, since the people are the only ones who give them money before the election, the people are the only ones to whom they are beholden after the election. And, you know, holding elected office on Tim's World kind of sucks. They don't even get to be wined and dined and schmoozed and maybe even slipped a little extra cash under the table by lobbyists, because on Tim's World, the lobbying industry does not exist. Strictly outlawed. On Tim's World, the only people who have access to elected representatives are the people who elected them and whom they represent. So, yeah, kind of sucks. For running a corporation on Tim's World kind of sucks too, because there is no such thing as corporate welfare. No subsidies for things like timber, so they can cut down the timber in our national forests, export it to other countries, and sell it at below market prices. Little side note here. Every once in a while, I would get an email about someone who wanted me to be outraged about timber cutting in our national forests. And I always sent the same reply back. Have you ever wondered why they're called national forests and not national parks? No more subsidies for stuff like tobacco, so that tobacco producers can continue to sell a product, market it to young people, a product which kills when used as directed. No government mandates forcing you to buy any certain product so that they can charge whatever the hell they want. And no more, and no writing tens of thousands of pages of regulations which serve no other purpose than to set up so many hoops to jump through that competitors can't even make it to the playing field. The only weapon that corporations have on Tim's World is the quality and value of their product. They have to compete with every cotton-picking startup that comes down the road. And if their product or service isn't good enough to win that competition, they don't get money that other people have earned and had confiscated, given to them to make up for their apparent lack of business acumen. And if they don't, they can either increase the value, increase the quality of their product, or they can find another line of work. And if they don't like that arrangement, tough cookies. You know what they have the power to do about it? Not a damn thing. There is one bright spot for the corporations, though, because the corporate tax rate on Tim's World is a big fat 0%. Why? Because corporate taxes are a myth. A silly myth. Corporations have never paid a dime in taxes, and corporations never will. Corporations don't pay taxes, they collect them from you. Tax any corporation 10 cents per unit on their product, they'll raise the price of that product by 10 cents. And then who gets to pay the tax? We do. Every single member of those corporations does pay their tax, though, even though on Tim's World, the IRS does not exist. That's right. No audits, no penalties and fees, no interest, no jail sentences, no one driven to suicide. And how do they do this? Because every country on Tim's world has a national sales tax. People are not taxed on what they earn. They're taxed on what they spend. Now, rich people spend a whole lot of money, but never more than they choose to spend. And poor people spend very little money. And no one has to file a tax return because the money just keeps continuously getting collected and sent to the government, cha-ching, 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 every single day. Even people who would never dream of filing a tax return, even people who have gotten away for years without paying any taxes at all, people like embezzlers, drug dealers, organized crime bosses, illegal aliens, criminals of every sort. Here's the thing, all of them also need food and cars and clothing and consumer electronics and really excellent informative books that are available on Amazon.com and are packed full of really entertaining stuff like this. They need those too. And guess what? They have to pay for them. Voila, they're taxpayers. They might think about stealing it from someone else for maybe 2 seconds. And then they remember that every single potential victim has a gun. So how much money does it bring in? Who knows? But I can tell you this. Since the federal government doesn't have a whole lot to do, they don't need a whole lot of money to do it. Now, some people might think that this national sales tax is too regressive. It punishes the poor. Well, since the poor spend very little money, they pay very little tax. Since the rich spend a lot more money, they pay a lot more tax. So it doesn't really punish the poor for being poor any more than it punishes the rich for being rich. You see, the poor on Tim's world, they've always paid some taxes, and they adjust to it. But even if they acquire a new, small financial burden, they would adjust to that too. There are some people who think that they're not capable of doing that because, after all, they're just poor. They can't do it themselves. They need your help. But on Tim's world, the poor are just as smart and just as capable and just as good as anybody else. They're also very rare. There are very few poor people on Tim's world. Why? Because they haven't been molded for generations into an institutionalized class. There are very few poor people on Tim's world because no one has a political need for a permanent underclass. You see, just as there is not a group of people who have always been accused of being the party of the rich, and therefore they have to keep the rich rich in order to preserve their voter base, there is also no other party claiming to be the party of the poor, who must therefore keep the poor poor in order to preserve their voter base. So there has never been a proposal on Tim's world for the poverty line to be replaced by a poverty percentile, thereby guaranteeing that no matter how prosperous the society becomes, even if they're driving Cadillacs and eating caviar, that there will still be a permanent underclass of poor people, among whom class envy and class warfare can be fomented. Because I gotta tell you, it's all about the class warfare. Without class warfare, Marxism can't even get out of the starting gate. Now, I know there's probably a lot of people who are very offended by that. Well, let me tell you, on Tim's world, if you're offended, tough luck. Because on Tim's world, we are all about minority rights. And the smallest minority there is the individual. And on Tim's world, every individual pays every other individual the respect and the dignity of allowing them to stand on their own 2 feet and fight their own battles. Every individual on Tim's World knows that they are responsible for what they say, what they do, and what they are given control over. So they also know that they are responsible for their own emotions. So if someone commits a microaggression against them, they are perfectly free to be micro-offended by it. And then they are perfectly free to go off and do whatever they need to do to make themselves feel better. And they are perfectly allowed to do whatever they want to do to make other people feel better. What they are not allowed to do is use their hurt feelings as an excuse to bully people who don't agree with them into behaving as if they do. So, if you're one of those people who just has this pathological need to have people agree with you, or a pathological need to wield power over human beings, then life on Tim's World is really gonna kind of suck for you. On Tim's World, no one is able to abuse their power over other people, because no one has any power over other people. All the power on Tim's World was long ago redistributed evenly among every last one of the people. Power to the people. It is jam-packed full of entertaining stuff like this. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll make hundreds and hundreds of julienne fries, whatever the hell they are. You'll find out things you never knew. You'll start to see connections you've never made before, and you'll start to think in ways that you never dreamed you'd think. Amazon.com, Dangerous Subversive Heresies. Next week, Potpourri, Part 2. I hope you'll come back for that. I hope you'll bring some friends. I hope you grow to be 100 million strong. But right now, I hope you have a good night. Good night.